Guys, welcome out to chapter 9 of Revelation. It's getting hard to keep track. This has been such a fun series though. I've loved getting into this. I've never taken such a deep look at this book and I'm just infatuated. It's so much fun. And I know I'm missing a lot of stuff too, so I'm excited also to come back to it again in the future as well. But we're going to keep rolling. I don't like long introductions, so get started. Verse 1. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. So, a couple thoughts here. One, stars symbolize angels. When they talk about the stars being held in Jesus's hands, I mean, it's referring to the angels of the churches. It's also something that is, that's something that we use to navigate. It's something that we use as a source of direction. It's something that's supposed to guide us. And in this case, it's something that has fallen. So it was the thing that God intended for us to be able to rely on and to look towards. And in some sense, I think that this refers to the intellect. I think it refers to logic and reason itself. Like logic is something that we should be able to use to navigate life, to figure things out. And a lot of times it falls and it leads us in weird directions, and we're able to rationalize things that don't actually make any sense. So we come out with all kinds of crazy stuff. And in this case, obviously, it's referring to Lucifer, who was the fallen angel. But it not only fell, it fell into the pit. So it went from its elevated position to something that is now below us. So it's not even that it's just on the same level as us. It's something that's below us. And I think in part that has to do with pride. It has to do with the fact that um, if you're not willing to serve, if you're not willing to fulfill the role that God has given you, not only do you not get all the good stuff, but you end up falling pretty far from grace, and you end up falling into a pretty bad state. So when our stars, quote unquote, fall, um, these are if you think of like people that you look up to, people that are respectable, people that are solid leaders, and then they screw up, they let it go, they let their pride get to them, they stray off the path. They often end up doing more damage in their fallen state than they ever did for good when they were in that higher position. It's a very sad thing to see. And God does allow the enemy to have some power over the world, but the fact that he fell into the pit shows that he also contains him, right? This is something that it's measured out appropriately. Without that pit for our safety, I think that those demonic forces would definitely overwhelm us. And God does allow us the choice and the freedom to follow those things if we want, but he does protect us and make it to where we're it's not too hard for us to handle. It's not too much. It's never going to be too much. And then being given the keys to the pit shows that in this case, it's been opened, right? Like the things that are about to happen in this chapter, it's showing that like this pit is not sealed anymore, that the fires of hell are about to be unleashed over the earth. And this is a pretty intense chapter. I like it a lot. But it's allowing the things that have been contained to come out and to begin to exert more influence. Verse 2 says, when he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. So when I read that phrase, I think of the term smoke and mirrors. The idea of illusion, of deception, of concealment, and that's how the enemy works. It's never like a direct, truthful, honest thing. It's always he's the father of lies. He's always hiding things. He always looks to deceive, and as he's been given a certain amount of influence and power in this world, we are surrounded by illusions, by falsehoods, and all kinds of crazy stuff. The smoke blinds us to the truth. It obscures the light. And if you look around to culture and how much well, everybody has kind of waged war on truth, this becomes pretty obvious. Like, what does that smoke represent? It's something that conceals the truth. And you look at like nowadays, people say that the truth is offensive. What does that even mean? The truth is offensive. Well, of course it is if you're a liar. And there's all this crazy stuff where they they use reason, they use the intellect, they use what was supposed to be the guiding light, and they invert it. They use it for in corrupt ways. They distort the truth. Things like, men and women are the same, or love is love. Quote, lust is love is what they really mean by that. The idea that men can be women, that all paths conveniently lead to God. So there's no need to dedicate yourself to God because you'll end up there anyway. These in any attempt to shed light on this and to argue with these people and to stand up against these ideologies is going to immediately lead to a huge backlash. People get so upset about this because the purpose of it's being led by the devil himself. This is not something that humans have come up with. This is not something that people have just said, you know what, this is what I figured out by my reasoning. No, like we were guided to this. We were nudged and pushed and manipulated. And the point of this is that if they can make you believe absurdities, they can make you commit atrocities. I believe that was Voltaire that said that. Once you can get people to reject their own reason, once you can get people to distort their own reason to the point where they don't know which way is up anymore, and their mind is hopelessly twisted, and they've rejected the only guiding light that could fix that for them, there's no hope. And you can easily lead them into committing horrible atrocities. You look at Auschwitz, you look at the abortion, you look at the quote gender affirming surgeries that people are doing. It's horrible, horrible things. It's mass torture and murder and the mutilation of like countless people. And it's like, where does that come from? Because people are fighting for this. People believe that this is the truth. And it's not because they have some divine enlightened sense of direction. It's because they're hopelessly immersed in this smoke, in this deception. And we all are. We can't get through this by ourselves. We don't have the right perspective. We don't have the right vantage point. We're in it. We're in the middle of it. The only hope is that we turn our eyes to God because he has the, I don't want to say bird's eye view. It's bigger than that. He can shine the light in the darkness. He's not deceived by any of this. And the reality is that we are in a spiritual war, and that war is very often fought with the weapon of attention. It's easy to distract you. It's easy to pull you off course. It's not as easy to convince somebody to do the thing that they know is wrong. But if you can get them to compromise, if you can get them to take attention off of the things that are true, off of their off of the North Star, like the actual guiding light that God offers us, the stability of his word and his promises. If you can get somebody to take their attention off that and put it on anything else, those things are transient. Those things are temporary. Those things are malleable. They can be corrupted. They can be moved. They can be distorted. And you look at how your attention is captured. I mean, social media is a fantastic example of this, but it's not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. If you can get somebody to look at something for just a second and you can cause an emotional reaction in that person, well, now the emotional brain's thinking, it's not thinking the same way as the logical brain is. You can know that something's wrong to do, but if you feel an overwhelming sensation that you should do it, the odds of you not doing it start to decrease pretty quickly. And you end up doing crazy things that you never would have thought you would do beforehand. And you end up justifying it afterwards. It's easy to distract you because you're at war with the flesh. You're at war with your own mind. And the body's going to react to things around you in a very specific way. So if you look at lust, for example, you see somebody that you're attracted to, you feel a physical sensation, and it changes the way that you think. It changes your attention. You kind of shift into a different mindset. If you think about anger, it's the same thing. You can look at something that incites rage, and now your attention is captured and you're sucked into that thing. And even after if you're scrolling through social media, if you're talking to somebody, if you're thinking about something, your body physically responds to those fantasies as if they're true. And I said this one time and somebody freaked out on me. So I always feel the need to explain, think about somebody that you hate and feel how your blood starts to boil. Think about somebody that you're really attracted to. See how also your blood starts to boil. It distracts you. It pulls you off course. And that is exactly what the point of the smoke is. It's something that obscures your ability to perceive reality accurately. It's something that distorts your perception. It's something that takes you off track. You think that you're moving in a straight line. In reality, you're walking in circles or you're walking straight into the pit. So when I was pretty new into the military, we had this event that is forever burned into my brain. And it wasn't really that serious, but it was just like really, it was an intense day. We'll leave it at that. But the lesson that I learned is that there's a difference between what we call cover and concealment. So what that means is if somebody's shooting at you, if you take cover behind something, that means that if they shoot that thing that you're taking cover behind, it could conceivably stop the bullets from hitting you, right? Concealment protects you from view. It keeps you from being seen, but it doesn't offer any physical protection. So camouflage would be concealment. Um, some like sticks and branches with leaves on them, that can be concealment. You're hidden from view, but you're not protected, right? You're 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 in that place like versus where you're behind something that's actually going to protect you. These things that are around you, they're all illusions, right? They're all things that are how do I say this accurately without ranting? Um, most of the things that we get caught up in, they're concealments for the truth. They're not things that are actually physically able to hurt you. They're things that are able to psychologically freak you out. So news, for example, something makes you feel afraid. And it's like it's not actually hurting you. It's not actually anywhere near you. It's just the idea of something that could conceivably cause damage. And now you're acting as if it's true. Now you're as afraid as if it were actually happening to you, but it doesn't have any physical, like tangible impact on you. It's all in your head. And it's like, well, you say it's all in your head, but it's like that's a real place too, in a sense. That's something that it's real to you, if nothing else. And maybe it's an illusion in the grand scheme of things, but it seems real. And so it's like a really tricky thing, but that's the war that we're in. It's things that distract you. It's things that obscure the truth. It's not. It's oftentimes not real tangible things. Sometimes it is. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it isn't. But the smoke in this particular example is something that is illusory. It's something that is concealing the actual hidden dangers. It's preventing you from identifying the things that can hurt you, but oftentimes it's just stuff that is it puts you into like the fog of war. It's just a haze. It's like I'm confused and I'm generally just distracted by everything that happens. I'm kind of upset about this person. Then I start thinking about, well, what am I going to do when I get home tonight? And now I realize, hey, I'm not home tonight. So now I'm feeling a little bit resentful that I have to be at work. Oh, she's kind of cute. Oh, that guy looks like someone that used to argue with me over stupid stuff. Now I'm angry at him. I'm also angry at my past. This other person reminds me of my ex. Now I'm thinking of her. Now I'm like, it's just, it's endless. It's endless. Like when you really sit down and try to identify the thoughts that you have throughout the day, it's actually really hard to do. It's hard to sit down and solidify what goes on through your head. And if you were to write things out stream of consciousness, if you do like a free writing exercise, you probably will see that your mind is really random. There's a lot of random crap in there and stuff just kind of pops up and is there. But what is dangerous about that is it oftentimes has a physical component to it. So if it's something that makes you feel afraid, your body responds as if there's actually something to be afraid of because it doesn't know the difference between your imagination and reality, especially an intense daydream kind of thing. Like if you really focus on something, you can work yourself up into an emotional state pretty easily. And the thing is that social media, the news, the way that people interact with each other, a lot of those things are designed to capture and manipulate your attention. And they do that through the use of emotions. And that's, in my view, is kind of what the smoke is doing. Not completely, but that's part of it. So it also stings the eyes. It inhibits our ability to see and to discern between truth and lies. I think I've said that already. It poisons the air that you breathe, right? And if you look back, we talk a lot about how breath and spirit are the same words in the older languages. If you think about like what is the thing that makes it difficult to pull in clean air or to pull in clean spirit, it doesn't mean that the spirit's not there. It doesn't mean that there isn't clean air and that there isn't fresh oxygen, but it means that if you put yourself close to the pit where the smoke is coming out of, if you allow yourself to only breathe in those toxic fumes, it it changes the way that you interact with spirit. It causes you to harden your heart because you feel all this pain, you feel all this discomfort, and you start to think, well, I'm just going to close myself off to it. I don't want to breathe. I don't want to pull in the breath of divinity that God is offering to me because that means that I have to confront my own issues. I have to confront my own iniquity because he's going to burn away all that stuff that doesn't belong. And that's painful. And if I've identified with that stuff, with that negative, with sin, then I'm caught trying to hold on to something because I feel like this is me and I can't imagine letting it go. That was a place that a lot of people find themselves in. I definitely did for the longest time. I was like, how do I let go of XYZ? Certain things that I really, really want that I know are wrong. How do I let go of it? And what I've realized recently is that a lot of times I didn't. I just kind of pushed to the side. It's like, well, that'll just sit there. But it doesn't just sit there, it festers. It creates a lot of issues down the road. And part of what Jesus came for, I mean, yes, he gives us eternal life, but if you're going to trust him with your eternity, you need to trust him with your life as well. If you're going to trust him with your spiritual health in the afterlife, you need to trust him with your mental, psychological health now. You need to trust him with the decisions that you make on a day to day basis. This isn't something that you wait on and one day it changes when you pass away. It's like, okay, cool. I'm good. I don't have to stress out about death. It's like, no, no, no. God is the God of life. The Old Testament very rarely refers to the afterlife. Very rarely. I think it's like once or twice. I don't quote me on that. It might be more, but it's not often because God is primarily concerned with life. He's concerned with how you live. Like that stuff after life is gonna handle itself. That's gonna be a whole separate thing. But right now you're on earth. You've got things to do. You've got a call on your life that you have a responsibility to answer to. And part of that means accepting the grace, the forgiveness, and the mercy that Jesus offers, but also means getting away from the pit so that you can breathe that clean air of the spirit again. And also just the last point on the smoke is that it's something that is displeasing. It's a harmful cloud as opposed to the smoke of a burnt offering, say. So when the nose discerns between what is pleasing to God, what is good, not just in appearance, but also across senses. So it's not just good to look at; it also tastes good. It also is has a a pleasing odor to it. Like the eyes can be deceived, your sense of taste can be deceived. But if you evaluate something across all five senses, the odds of it being something that's bad for you decreases because you can look at a steak and say, "Oh, that looks delicious." You can look at a boiled egg and say, "That looks delicious. It looks fine." You could taste it. Maybe it's not even that big of a deal. It's like, yeah, it's fine, but it might smell really, really bad. And if you eat it, you're going to get sick, right? And so, in the sense, like the thing that is polluting the air, this smoke, is also something that is polluting us on a psychological level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level as well. Okay, verses 3 through 4. And out of the smoke, locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So instead of being a plague upon the crops, they are a plague upon anyone who is not set apart for God. And now it's interesting when you say that because it's like sometimes like it's a demonic attack on believers, on the church, on Christians, on individuals, and it's like the purpose is to make them fall away, right? And God can use that for his own will, obviously, but in this case it's more of those things. It's one of those things like it's not his chosen people that are being attacked, it's everyone else. So the purpose of that is to turn them away from what they're doing, to say like, hey, like we're being plagued by this, but these Christians aren't. What makes them different? And that will make more sense in just a second. Let me get into it. Let's talk about what the symbol, what like the locust kind of symbolizes here. The locust is something that devastates. It deprives of sustenance. It's something that destroys the crops. It's something that is considered to be a plague, right? The scorpion is something that stings and poisons, and so there's this. And so the locust, like a scorpion, is like that's an interesting combination. And in short, their purpose is to torment humans, is to cause pain, is to cause discontent. If you only ever pursue pleasure, if you're able to just indulge in your carnal passions and desires, then you don't have any reason to turn away from this earth and turn away from the world and turn towards God. But if you introduce pain and it's like, hey, like actually this isn't all that great, it lets you know, hey, this is an illusion. This thing that feels good is transient. This isn't going to last. It feels good for a couple minutes, but what are the long-term repercussions? What are the consequences of engaging in this lifestyle? And it's not something that we think about a whole lot until it starts to hurt. speaking from experience there. So with earthbound animals, I like to think also in terms of physicality, in terms of the like the material body, the passions, right? So if you think about like a lion attacking, I would look at that a little bit differently than something that is airborne. To me, and again, this is my interpretation. I'm not trying to say like this is the final word on it, but maybe as a tool for meditation, something to think about, like what does this locust exactly mean? Is it literally going to be a locust? Probably not. It's probably a symbol, but I like to point to a psychological mental plague, like it's something that's airborne, like that has a like air tends to be related to the mind versus the earth more to the body. So if you think about this plague as being a mental plague, an emotional plague, you can consider the locust to be a plague of thought. It's something that's overwhelming, it's draining, it causes a physical reaction. There's infectious ideologies that are contaminating the minds of all who are without the seal of God on their foreheads. And of course, they also do affect the fruit of the earth in a certain way, but it's almost like the further that you descend into the pit, into the earth, into your own physicality, the more obsessed you become with the material, the further you are away from the celestial. And then out of that pit, which is a departure from the spiritual, you get that the locusts are coming up, but that they're involved in this scene. It's a plague of depravity and torture. The more obsessed culture becomes with the self, like with the individual self, the more their minds become plagued. Think about all the mental health disorders that we have. Think about how modern people put the focus on themselves and then shockingly spiral out of control further and further out into the wilderness. It's like you put you put yourself as the idol, and you put all your hope and faith and trust in you, and you suck. You're dumb. You're not equipped to be God. Sorry. And people are surprised when they become anxious. It's like, yeah, you should be. If you're the only thing you have to trust in, if you are the ultimate authority, you better be scared, because you cannot handle very much at all. You need something higher than you. And we weren't created to be to lead ourselves in that way. We are created to follow God, right? And you look at the increase of psychological disorders of fear, anxiety over what? It's like these words like generalized anxiety. What does that mean? Like you're just scared all the time of everything? Well, yeah, when you live in your head, when you never awaken the like the spiritual potential inside of you, when you're obsessed with the material, which is fleeting and constantly dying, of course you're going to be anxious and afraid all the time. Of course you're going to be depressed, because everything that you hold dear is decaying constantly and is not trustworthy in any way, shape, or form. Without God to guide you, you are left trying to figure out your way through the smoke and the locust by yourself with no sense of direction except your internal guidance system, which is also stuck in the smoke. You don't know where you're going. So these plagues also, as a side note, they allude back to Egypt, right? The Israelites were held in bondage, and the plagues were one of the things that helped shake everything up. And oftentimes the Israelites were protected from the plagues, whereas the Egyptians, the pagan society around them, the culture, the world that they lived in and were trying to manage, they were the ones that were attacked. And I think it's the same kind of idea here. Is like we're being led out of bondage. There are these plagues upon the earth, but the intention is not to hurt the church. It's to turn away the people that are opposing God. Is to demonstrate God's power to them, so that they might take a step back and think, huh, actually, I can't do this by myself. Because if things get bad enough at some point, if you've worshiped yourself, at some point you have to admit, I don't know what's going on. I can't do this. At some point, you have to turn away. Well, you don't have to, actually. We're going to see that in a second. But, reasonably, you would think that at some point you get to the end of the line and you say, yeah, I can't do this. God, save me. And then God can act and he can redeem that situation. But we'll see in a second that they don't do that. Verse 5 says the locusts, they were not allowed to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of a sting of a scorpion when it strikes. So I've already mentioned we tend to look at suffering as a bad thing, obviously, but the truth is that pain can often break us out of the routines and the habits that have solidified into prison bars. Suffering takes our eyes off of the pursuit of pleasure and brings us back to the reality of our situation, which is that we live in a fallen world saturated with the smoke of hell. But we need not fear that plight because Jesus says to take heart. He has already overcome the world. We don't need to live in that bondage. We can accept the gift and the grace that he has given us, which is salvation of our souls, but also freedom from oppression in general. We don't have to be a slave to our carnal nature anymore. We don't have to be a slave to sin. We don't have to be a slave to the world. We are freed. And sometimes that looks like a process, but guess what? That's okay. Because if we follow God, we're eventually going to end up where he wants us to be. And that's much better than anything that we could have come up with on our own. Now, as far as the 5-month period goes, I can't say that I have a satisfactory answer for that interpretation. The one thing that I do get from that is that, there is a certain time that's allotted for those creatures to terrorize people. It's fixed, it's limited, it's not just never ending. It's not just like go wreak havoc. It's like, no, there's a certain segment of time. There's probably, I know that there's deeper significance to it. I'm not really sure what it is at the moment, but maybe when I go back through, I'll figure it out. Verse 6. During those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. Listen, every single day, you can see the walking dead. You can see people that are living as if they are already dead. They are dead inside. They are mentally checking out. They are numbing themselves, distracting themselves into oblivion and justifying it. They're getting stoned, watching TV, scrolling on social media as the gears of time grind them down into a shell of a person. Listen, I am here to tell you that the church is waking up from its hibernation. We are shaking free of all that complacency, of all that lethargy. The age of passive, weak, cowardly men and weak, corrupt women is coming to an end. We are no longer accepting the sentence of lifelong death. We are not sitting around submissively while society tramples on the hearts of our children, our family, our friends, the people that we care about. It's not happening anymore. It has been like that for a long time. We see that in the world, and we see that, unfortunately, in the church. God does not want it to be that way. He has not called us to be this way. He has called us to have life and to have it abundantly. He wants us to, I don't want to say, I want to be cautious about saying that he wants us to be happy, but he wants us to be fulfilled. He wants us to be involved and engaged. He wants us to participate in the plan that he has. And that plan is not for you to accept him into your heart and then wait around to die. It just isn't. People in general are figuring this out. People are tired. People are hurt because of the locusts. Probably there's been so much pain. There's been so much stuff that's happened, so much junk that people carry around with them, so much heartbreak, so much adversity, so much confrontation, so many things that have stifled our will to live and engage in life. And people are starting to shake free of that. They are starting to find their voices. We are fighting back, and God is using that pain of the earthly plagues to shake apart the chains of complacency and spiritual apathy. And that is paving a way for revival of purpose, revival of passion, revival of the Holy Spirit. He is raising up a new generation of righteous warriors to resist the schemes of evil and forcibly take ground for his kingdom. And it's not a pretty process. It comes from a very dark place a lot of times. The Bible says that God hides himself in darkness. And what does that mean? Well, it means that it's in those dark places that we find God oftentimes, because when he just hands it to us, sometimes we take it. Some people do. I've seen people that are just like, their whole life has been easy and they love God, they follow God. And I'm a little bit jealous. Like, I wish I was that smart when I was 18 to just listen to God instead of going my own way. But a lot of people, myself included, we fall into all kinds of crazy stuff. We fall into sin, we fall into temptation, and we get pulled down closer and closer to this pit. We get lost in the smoke. And it takes years, sometimes decades, sometimes an entire lifetime before people start to realize, hey, I'm not supposed to live like this. I'm supposed to actually live. I'm not supposed to be dead. I'm not supposed to be wandering in utter confusion and darkness and pain and turmoil. This isn't what Jesus died for. I'm supposed to be doing something with my life. And people have been lied to for so long. Culture has told us for so long, like, just focus on being busy, focus on yourself, focus on material things, focus on just be normal, fit into society, do the things that everybody else is doing. Well, guess what? Everybody is miserable. They are. Look at the divorce rates, look at the suicide rates, look at the depression and anxiety statistics. I don't even know what they are, but it's hard to find somebody that isn't dealing with something really truly serious. And sometimes it's something like, cancer. Sometimes it's a lot of times I would say it's things that are not tangible. And they're real, they matter, but they're not like a tangible thing. Like, you're not at war getting shot at. Some people are for sure, but a lot of people are not. But they're miserable. And they just kind of go through life in zombie mode. And it's like, that's not what God wants for us. He wants us to be fulfilled. Again, not necessarily happy. Who was it? Elisha? I get him and Elijah confused all the time, but I think it was Elisha. He was horribly depressed. He asked God to end his life. Moses had anger issues. He spoke to God face to face, and he still lost his temper like multiple times. It's like, having that encounter with God, being close to God, doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll be happy in a physical sense. Doesn't mean that you're always going to be in a good mood. It doesn't mean that you reach this enlightened state of like, oh, happy go lucky, everything's fine. But it does mean that you're fulfilled. It does mean that you're invigorated. It does mean that you're filled with the Spirit, and that transcends life. That transcends this reality, this place that we inhabit for the moment. But it also doesn't mean that you reject that, because again, God is a God of life. He's interested in how we live. He's interested in what we do here. If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't have to accept him or deny him now. He cares about what we do in this life. And that can be kind of a terrifying thing to think about because, well, I don't really know what's going on. I don't know about you guys. That's a lot to think about. But the reality is that the things that we do have tremendous long-term consequences. Think about Jacob wrestling with God. And you think about how for him that was like that moment of conflict, and like you can compare that to a lot of different situations, like the idea of struggling with God and actually fighting with God. And the fact that he wants you to do that to some extent. He wants you to work things out in a somewhat confrontational way. He wants you to grab hold of the things that are bothering you and to do something about it. It doesn't mean that you're going to be right. It doesn't mean that you're going to win. But Jacob refused to let go. He refused to give up until he was blessed, until he was given that blessing. And of course, he was. And you look at like what came of that. What came of that was the nation of Israel. And to him, it was just this little overnight battle, probably the longest night of his life. But look at the long-term impact. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He's fighting for a nation. And that is the nation that Jesus came from. That is the nation through which the rest of the world is blessed. We don't know what kind of ripple effect our actions are going to have. The stuff that we do in life really matters. And when we check out, when we decide, I don't want to handle this, I can't deal with it, I don't want to confront it, I just want to, take a step back. I want to, numb myself. I want to distract myself. I don't want to face reality. You live in a dead state and you just sit around waiting to die. It's horribly depressing to think about, but it's a situation that a lot of people are in. The world has rejected God. And because of that, they have rejected life. Although they cling to this life, even what they have, that little bit that they have, this fleeting life will be taken away from them. There's nothing you can do to slow it down. What matters is what you do with it. These people, and I've been guilty of this too, they look for death because they want to escape the realities of life. And this is part of what I'm talking about when I say that, like, people need to step up, especially men. You need to stop being lazy. We got to get it together. We have to be men again. We have to confront the harsh realities that we are faced with. When we check out, when we don't deal with this, this is what we look like. men sitting around waiting to die. That's not what God wants. And it's not helpful for anybody. And you don't know what could happen. It's like, hey, I think that this is unfair. I want to deal with it. I want to do something with it. You don't know what could happen if you really confronted those issues. You don't know what could happen if you stepped up and took responsibility for where you're at in life and tried to find a way through it. You don't know what could happen if you are honest with God and say, I'm really bothered by certain things. How could you let this happen? Why am I this way? Why does he get that and I don't? Why is there so much suffering? Now, be careful asking those questions because God is honest and he's going to tell you. Um, Sometimes that can be a pretty terrifying thing, and it's always a humbling thing. Sometimes it's with grace, sometimes it's with a certain amount of severity, and you just don't know. But that's part of like you have to do that. You have to be honest with God. You have to open your heart up to him. If you say, I'm only going to bring the good things to you, I'm not going to actually pray to you about how dead I feel on the inside. I'm not going to pray to you about the things that are truly bothering me. I'm not going to go out in life and say, look, there's XYZ. There's a certain number of things that I'm faced with on a day to day basis that I know are not the way they should be. Things that I'm doing, things that I'm allowing, things that I'm just in the midst of. I'm not going to deal with them though. I'm not going to pray for guidance on those things. And when I get in it, even if I do, I'm going to pray that they just go away, that they just vanish. I'm not going to work on them. Well, what happens at that point? Like, well, if you can't deal with the problems, you're not going anywhere. So you're just going to sit and you're going to atrophy. You're going to decay. They're looking, and this is the state that people are in. They're looking for that escape. See it with TV, see it with social media, see it with any number of things. Any number of things. I don't think I have to beat that horse too much. When life becomes painful, the weak fall out. They give up, but the strong persist. Jesus says that in the last days, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. That stands firm part is really important because it means that this is not going to be easy. Have you ever wondered why so many bad things happen to children, to innocent people that don't deserve it? It's because Satan knows that if he can twist the hearts of the young, he can relax and let them do the rest of his work for him. He can just step back and let them spiral out and hurt everyone else around them for the rest of their lives. That is why the spiritual attack on children and young people is so intense. Children, teenagers, people that don't necessarily deserve it, people that are vulnerable. Because if he can corrupt the heart of a young person, if he can cause that person to harden their heart and for their love to grow cold, to close up, to be too afraid to open up and to face life with an open heart, with the grace that God has provided to us, if he can get people to close off and not accept that, they will take care of the rest for him. That is why you need to be preparing for this battle because you're going to be constantly attacked. The people around you are going to be constantly attacked. You have to make yourself strong. You have to get right with God. You have to spend the time every single day with him, following his will, spending time in his word, spending time in prayer, in worship. To say, I'm going to go to church every Sunday and I'm going to pray really hard on Sunday. And then throughout the week, I'm not going to open my Bible. I'm not going to pray. It's silly. You're not prepared for war. And trust me, evil is. The enemy is. The people that the end of the beings that you are up against have been preparing for this for thousands of years. They've got it down. If you are not walking closely with God, you don't stand a chance. How are you going to stand firm if you're relying on yourself and you are not stable? The next time you want to get mad at God for the things that have happened to you, I think this is a very important point here. Because things do happen to us and they seem unfair. And it seems like, hey, we should blame God for this. Why would he allow this? Remember that it was not his will for that to happen. He gives people free will. People hurt each other. People make the wrong decisions. He didn't want for that to happen. You may be upset that you got hurt, but God is furious that you got hurt. You were never meant to be raised apart from his love and apart from his peace. You were born as a child of the Most High and were stolen. Ever since then, he has fought like you would not believe to get you back. So before you blame God, take a second to think, what was his will? What was my role in this? Did something happen to me and I was innocent? Okay. Was that because he didn't care about me? Or is that because an evil entity wanted to destroy my life, wanted to harden my heart by exposing me to something that I should not have been exposed to? And that may have corrupted me, and that may have twisted my thinking. And just maybe that's not the person I should be listening to. If someone is willing to do that to me, and the follow up thoughts are also bitter and angry and hurt, maybe I should take a closer look at that and say, I don't have the answers here. I'm living in the smoke of hell. I'm lost. I'm disoriented. I don't know which way is up. I don't understand how this was fair. Maybe it wasn't. But maybe I should start listening to the only one that can save me. Maybe I shouldn't be fixated on the humming of the locusts around me. Maybe I should be focused on the voices of other people who are just as lost as I am. Maybe I shouldn't be listening to the people on social media, to the 14-year-olds on TikTok that seem to have all the answers. Maybe I shouldn't be listening to the news. Maybe I shouldn't be listening to the deconstructionists because they've twisted their own thoughts. They've allowed themselves to spiral out. The thing that could have been a wake-up call, that pain, that thing that seems so unfair, that could have been the sign to turn around and help save other people from having to go through that. That could have been your motivation to get up and get to work, because it is. That's what your calling is. The things that you have struggled with the most are the things that you are called to help other people not have to deal with. Because if you can help them make better decisions, if you can show them where that leads, if you can teach them ways to overcome that, if you can support them through that and be a messenger for Jesus, who is the only one who can ultimately save us, well, hey, look at that. You've done something good in the world. But we don't think that way. We get focused on how we've been hurt and it seems unfair. We get mad, but we don't confront it. And that's the real problem there. We don't, and I'm not saying like get mad at God. I'm saying, but be honest with God. Like, I'm hurt in these certain ways. I need to wrestle with you a little bit. Hey, these things that are not quite right in my life, they're freaking me out. I don't know what to do about them. I'm actually really hurt. I'm really annoyed. I'm really angry about this. And people just let it go. People just like, oh, yeah, my kid's doing that. It is what it is. Oh yeah, my spouse is treating me this way. Oh yeah, the church isn't quite, I don't like that move that they made, but yeah, whatever, theology. Like, no, stand up, start doing something about it. Confront those things, wrestle with it, confront it, deal with it. Now, you may not like what you find because you may learn that you have a hand in that, that you are somewhat to blame, but like, that's how you get better. You're not called to be perfect. You're called to obey. You're not called to understand. You're called to follow. God will lead you through that. But the problem is that we wander around. We choose to wander around in the smoke, in the fog. We choose to keep blindly stumbling through the darkness instead of turning our eyes upwards. So I think that that's very important, because people, that is a plague as well. The sense of apathy and emptiness, the whole dead inside thing. And I relate to it. I get it. The love of this world has grown cold, but we serve the God of life, the God who raised Lazarus from the dead, and he is beating on the door of your heart, commanding, come out of your tomb. Wake up. God says he has seen your tears and he will heal you. His will is not for us to live as zombies. It's just not. But when you avoid doing the work and the tasks that he has assigned to you, when you don't answer the call that he has put on your life, when you don't do the little daily disciplines that he encourages us to do, what do you expect to have happen? You check out, you turn inwards, you follow yourself, you stop listening, you stop receiving. Don't wish for death because of the pain that you suffer. Instead, pray for the smoke to clear from your eyes so that you might behold the glory of God, the God who surrounds his people with chariots of fire. He leads them to safety amongst a host of angels. The spiritual war is real. I talked a little bit recently about the scene where Elisha prays for his servant's eyes to be opened in the midst of that battle. And the servant was deathly afraid of this approaching army. But when he saw through the illusion, when he saw the spiritual reality around that situation, he saw that The hills were surrounded with hills of or chariots of fire. They were being escorted, they were being protected, they were being cared for, provided for. And that's just the reality that we live in. That's what God does for us on a daily basis. It seems like we're alone sometimes. We're really not. It's just hard to keep that perspective when we're wandering around lost in the smoke. All right. One more time. Listen. I love that word. Listen. Don't give up on life because of the pain. It's a tool of the enemy, and it should rile you up to no end to know that the devil intentionally inflicts pain upon the undeserving, just to lead them away from the glory of the one that he envies. Things might look hopeless, but I assure you, this is because of the smoke that obscures our vision. God has got this. In fact, if you are at the end of your rope and you feel like life is just too much, I encourage you, allow that to motivate you to get to work resisting the formulations of the vile and the depraved. You have work to do, and you have a mission, you have a purpose. And if it seems like it's too much for you to handle, don't worry. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. His grace is sufficient for us. That's all we need. His spirit is with us. It is leading us. It is a part of our daily life. We can't get away from it, but we can choose to ignore it. So stop tuning it out. A lot of times we tune out and we check out emotionally because we don't want to do the things that we're called to do. And we think that if we just avert our eyes, we don't confront that, we don't look at it too much, so we won't have to do those things. And maybe that's true, but then again, we miss out on all the blessings that we could have. Because to numb yourself to the pain is to numb yourself also to the joy, to all the good things. Verses 7 through 12. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers and scorpions in their tails. They had the power to torment people for 5 months. They had as a king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, something like that. I'm probably saying it wrong. And in Greek is Apollyon, which is destroyer. The first woe is past. 2 other woes are yet to come. Very ominous. So it's interesting that the locusts are described to resemble humans so closely. The face of a man with women's hair wearing breastplates, which, is interesting to me on a personal level, because a lot of times when I'm in like deep meditation, I'll start to become aware of the thoughts that are just like floating through my head constantly. And I like the internal monologue, and I don't even think about it as a monologue. A lot of times I just think of it as like, that's my thoughts, right? But then sometimes when I get into a meditation, I'll start to get a little bit detached from that, and I'm not as engaged in it, but it's still going on, and I realize, hey, my brain's actually just working all the time. And it's chaotic as all get out. It's crazy. And a lot of times what I'll notice is that without even realizing it, I've started to visualize that internal voice as like my head floating around, super disembodied. Maybe that's weird. I don't know. I'm not trying to like read into it. I'm just like, when I think about the locust as like a head floating around, like it's humanish, but not quite. Like that's what I think of. And I'm like, I wonder if there's something to that, or if I'm just crazy. Like maybe there's like that swarm of thoughts, those internal thoughts that are just plaguing you. Maybe not, who knows. But it's this locust is, it's a thing with the characteristics of a human, but it's predatory, it's monstrous, and the teeth are lion's teeth. They're for devouring, and the stingers are there specifically for torture. They don't serve any like useful purpose other than to inflict pain. And what's really interesting to me is the women's hair. The swarm is described to be like war horses, right? They're going into battle. And it's very unusual for warriors to wear their hair long. It just is. There's issues of hygiene. There's comfort if you got a helmet on, right? It's going to get super hot. You're going to sweat more. You're going to get overheated easier. It gets dirty. You can get sick. There's lice. There's sweat. There's which is going to drip down into your face in battle. There's an opportunity for somebody to grab it. Like if you're in a sword fight and somebody's, it's like at the final quarter of that battle and like you're all tired, your helmet's all askew and whatever, and like somebody grabs onto your hair and pulls it, like you're kind of it's not normal to have long hair if you're a warrior, if you're a soldier, right? It's not the norm. So the fact that the locusts possess effeminate qualities, that could be pointing to like an amalgamation of masculine and feminine forms of attack. It could also have something to do with the chaos that comes from violating God's natural laws. He made us male and female, and attempting to blend or to interchange those polar opposites does not produce beauty, it produces monstrosity and pain. And but the focus here is not on the human features. It's on the comparison to the horses, the chariots, which to me indicates the animality of these creatures, right? It's not necessarily like an intelligent reasoning force, something that is like strategically deciding how to attack us. It's just this blind like frenzy of like just a primal attack, right? It's somewhat unthinking. Maybe it's a plague on the mind, but it's not a plague of like intelligent, specific, intentioned thought. It's just it's chaos. Like it's a herd mentality. It's a swarm. They're similar to humans, but they're not quite there. They're just like the thoughts and the ideas that are tearing our society apart. They seem to resemble human ideas, but there's something very clearly demonic about them. You look at these new age ideologies and philosophies that we're dealing with, they're not quite right. On the surface, they seem like they could be a natural human inclination, but at their core, they are direct attacks on the order that was established by God in the beginning. Love is love, like I said earlier, which is really confusing love with lust, desire. Men can be women. Everything is relative. You make your own truth. You should just be tolerant. You should be accepting. Love means affirmation. Gender dysmorphia totally is not a mental health disorder. I'm not even saying it right, but porn addiction, it's normal. It's cool. It's just a video. Making porn is trendy too. That's cool, right? Personal empowerment and individual happiness, that's the ultimate goal, right? Men are trash. You need a girl boss up. Don't worry about them. Or on the other end of the spectrum, women are hypergamous, so they can never love you unless you're rich, right? Like all these ideas, like they seem like they have a basis and rationality, but they're not really from people. Society is inundated with these satanic philosophies, and they're things that are just disguised to very closely resemble the pinnacle of human intellectual development, but they're in reality parasitic and predatory. And God calls us to be set apart from such things, to not participate in these things, and to not be blown around by all these new, ideologies and teachings. So, also the last point on the locust. Normally, a locust does not have a king to direct their movements. They don't have like that one locust that's calling the shots. They move a bit like schools of fish. They stay together, but they don't have any particular direction other than like the aggregation of their natural instincts. And honestly, that's how most people live their lives. They stick with the herd. They do their best not to get too far out of the flow of things. If you look at trends, for example, like the fads, that like the internet sensations, people get caught up in the stuff and they're all about it for a while. And then this like one fish moves in a different direction and now it's all about this other thing. And that's why like trying to get rich off of monetizing people's attention is a nightmare, because people don't have a good attention span. They're constantly being led in different directions. They're constantly getting distracted by the new shiny object. And I mean, it is what it is. This is the reality that we live in. People stick with the herd. They do their best to not get too far out of the flow of things. But what the swarm reveals is that inside of this swarm of demonic ideologies lurks a guiding intention. That mass chaos that we see unfolding in our world and in our lives, it's not random. It's not the blind herd mentality that it looks like. It is strategic. It's calculated. It's deliberate. The murder, torture, and depravity that is so rampant in society is planned. It's celebrated within the depths of the pit. And I used to be so confused and wonder how an entire nation could be overwhelmed with, say, the pride for sexual immorality, how how we can get infected with the lunacy of woke new age ideology. How could they fall for that? How could they fall for any of this? The psychotic delusion of transsexual beliefs. And then one day it clicked for me. It's like, oh, it's Satan. It's the devil. That makes sense. That's why it's like there's this king of the destruction within this. There's the father of lies. It's intentional. It's strategic. It's not an accident. This is how people like, how do things escalate? How do things get out of control? It's because somebody's throwing fuel on the fire. So the last little segment here is verses 13 through 21. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar that is before God. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the four angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the three plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshiping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. I do want to point out there that like the whole the pagan thing, the nature worship, the idolatry, whether that's intentional or not, it is demonic. They are worshiping demons. When they look at like worshiping, spiritual forces, which we could argue maybe do exist and are do have some kind of like sway in the grand scheme of things, to worship nature as opposed to the creator is still demonic, right? You're not putting your attention in your worship, your adoration in the right place. You're putting it on something that is created, transient, and fallible, right? Versus in God. And a lot of times when the things that we do idolize, behind the thing that makes it look so good is a demonic presence. So we see people that are, in this case, they're stubborn. I've been talking for a while. They are stubbornly refusing to let go of their sin and turn towards God. Those dark places can be horrible, but they're the perfect place for God to display his glory in our lives. Jesus has already overcome the world. He has already risen from the grave, and he invites each and every one of us to turn away from the chains that drag us down to earth, to the pits. So as bad as these plagues seem, if you were to turn from that and to cry out, God would save you. And also, like, people that have the most powerful testimonies oftentimes were far from God. They were deliberately moving away from God, and he pulled them out of that pit. He pulled them out of that place. It's like he will save you if you turn to him. But as a whole, in general, people do not. And I could be wrong about this next part. So please be critical of me and let me know if you disagree. Correct me if you find any fault with the statement. But it seems to me that the altar itself is also a very important symbol here. So Exodus 20:24 says, make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Your sheep and your goats and your cattle, wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. So that altar is where we burn our sacrifices. It's where we offer up the corruption of our flesh, the corruption of our animal nature, that the grace of our Lord might incinerate the corruption of our flesh. The earthen altar, I believe, in this case, is meant to represent, at least in part, us, because we too are made of earth. It represents the material world because it's the element in which we live. The earthen altar implies that God wants us to sacrifice from right where we are. We're not meant to try to escape the world, but rather to be a nation of priests who use our physical reality to build something that might be set apart and dedicated to the worship of God. The act of making an earthen altar, which is holy and consecrated unto God, reflects the way in which Christ takes our bodies, these earthen pots, and he fills them with his grace, his glory, his sanctification. So, in that sense, the earthen altar represents our bodies and the physical universe in which we operate, whereas the golden altar here before God represents the higher spiritual realm in which the angels are fighting for our souls, and the beauty of our worship is perfected. It's the spiritual principle that's operating on a much higher level from which all of our day to day reality is reflected. It is from those horns, which represent strength, it's from the horns of those altar, this truth that speaks out to the angel, this voice that speaks out, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. That's where the command comes from that higher spiritual reality, which is set apart and dedicated to God. Four angels to spread to the four corners of the earth. The river Euphrates specifically shows up in the Bible quite a bit. First appears in the Garden of Eden as one of the four rivers. Now, water is the source of life, and whoever drinks of the water that Christ offers will never go thirsty again. The fact that it was part of the water of paradise definitely has some symbolic importance there. But here, um, you know, that river which was originally life giving is now releasing death and destruction. It's the angels that are coming out of it are not pleasant to confront. Understand this: rivers historically act as boundaries. They are and were life giving, but they're also natural barriers. They act to separate and to mediate between man and nature. When the order and the boundaries of God's laws are violated, what is revealed within those laws is a built in corrective response. There are natural checks and balances in any ecosystem, and to continuously defy God's divine order and purpose with idolatry and abominations of sexual exploitation is to trigger a natural recoil, a natural defense mechanism. The wages of sin is death. And when the pendulum swings from God's patience to God's wrath, the result is judgment and destruction. Now, culture tells us that progress means breaking these boundaries, that the truth is relative. But the drying up of the Euphrates River, which we haven't seen quite yet, but the drying up of that river demonstrates how when we become prideful enough to believe that we can transcend God's design and break those barriers, what is actually occurring as that boundary starts to fade is nothing more than a spiritual drought. Now, the 200 million in this example may be referring to a physical army, it may be referring to a spiritual army, it may be referring to a large organization. My mind keeps going to social media. I'm not saying that social media is the fulfillment of that pattern, but I think it does participate in it. It's the idea of like there's a great horde of enemies that are attacking from many different direction. It's a gigantic number. It's kind of too much to count. And you look at like how everyone now is an influencer, right? Like, how am I making this? Like, I'm making this from, I've been doing podcasting from my room for 3 years now. And it's like, that's great if you have something good to say. But the fact is that a lot of people don't. They spew nonsense. And I've definitely been guilty of that at times. I've not been perfect and I've done my best, but I'm human and I'm also, learning as I go. So when you think of like an attack coming from 200 million different directions at once, well, how many people are making content and they all disagree with each other and they all disagree with God? It's like you start to get a different picture of it. I'm not saying that is the fulfillment of the prophecy, but I think that the pattern of prophecy, the pattern of reality that's being revealed through the prophecy, I think that social media is a part of it. Maybe it's a smaller version, maybe it is the fulfillment, maybe the end's tomorrow. I have no idea. But I think that it's important to look at the spiritual war from this perspective. Okay, so the colors, wrapping up here, the colors are very interesting. These are the colors of flame. Red and blue, I mean, you see blue in like the middle of the flame, and sulfur is yellow. And this image does specifically seem to be pointing to a plague of fire. There's probably some symbolic um, message behind that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be physically a fiery plague, but there could be a literal component to that. There could be literal plagues of fire. Who knows? We will find out. The horses with snake tails also remind me of scorpions, and the whole thing with the locusts being compared to scorpions. I think that those connect somehow. It's really interesting that there is this theme of danger from multiple directions. Like the scorpion can attack you from multiple directions. The horse can attack you from multiple directions because it's got its teeth, and then it also has like the snake on the other end. Um, I think that that's relevant. I think that does connect to the 200 million person army, um, because that's exactly how the devil works. It's never just a one way attack. It's in reality is that we're surrounded by so many layers of deception and so many different distractions, so many different illusions and things that we lose track of what's truth and what's just smoke. And I like to think of like a hall of mirrors that's also filled with smoke. It's like you don't know where you're going, and you can't really tell if something is real or an illusion until you test it, till you wrestle with it, till you push on it a little bit and you see what happens. And sometimes you realize this is the boundary, sometimes you realize this is just deception. um so yeah, I think that that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you guys for sticking through the whole episode. I appreciate your time. I hope that I have done a good job with this extraordinary book. If you ever have any questions, feel free to hit me up on social media. I'm under Lamp of the Body on Instagram, and I'm fairly responsive on there. But God bless you all. Good luck this week. Get out there, confront those demons that you've been hiding from. Um, if you felt moved at all by any of the things that I said today, I really encourage you to pray about it. I encourage you to give it some serious thought and to actually sit with it and not just move on and like, okay, yeah, that was a good message. I feel good. Now I'm just going to go out there and keep doing what I was doing before. No, like grapple with it, deal with it, try to make something of it. See what God has in store for you. See what those daily things that see what are those daily things that God wants you to do. And I think that in doing that, you'll start to see what His long term plan is, from a better perspective. So thank you for listening. Good luck.